Coming up on Help Before You Sell.
I'm hearing hard and time consuming. It doesn't sound particularly easy. So I'm going to have to be consistent with stuff that is exponentially harder because I'm doing it consistently.
If you want to nurture your audience for years into the future, people run short of inspiration when they set too narrow a focus on what they're writing about or talking about.
It's about taking the time to reflect, see what works, and what the optimum balance between frequency, consistency, and audience value. Finding the balance of those things, having the time to reflect, analyze, to be able to have that data, to be able to find that out. I think that's the important thing too.
Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
So Pete, I just wanted to point out that it is the 9th of January. It's very cold. It is hat and glove weather.
Well, it is hat and glove and scarf as well. I'm here in my rather grandly named podcast studio, spare box room in our house here. And I went out for a walk earlier and I didn't want to take my scarf off. I'm not allowed the heating on during the day.
The reason we love gloves is because we describe the help before you sell approach to marketing as being like a glove. So it's generous, loving, opulent, valuable, and easy. Because if it's not easy, you're not going to do it in the long term, and you're going to lack consistency. And consistency is today's theme.
It's what it's all about. We've both got stories of consistency.
We do. Let me ask you first, because I've known you for long enough, and I've seen you start daily blogs and things like that, and I've seen you be very consistent for a period, and then eventually these things fizzle out. And I wonder what your experience was of showing up on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, my internalization, like in my bones of consistency, has come from something outside of marketing. One day, I went for a run and I ran 2 miles, and the next day I went for a run for 2 miles, and I did that for a week, and I thought, what if I could do this for a month? So I did it for a month. I ran at least 2 miles every day for a month, and I did that for a week shy of 9 years. There is something about through COVID and everything.
Through COVID, with COVID, through walls, in the ice and snow. I did not run in the ice and snow.
In wind, rain, ice, snow, it didn't matter. I'd made a commitment and I went.
You do it whether you feel like it or not.
You would do it whether you feel like it or not. Yeah. And it's no surprising that when you do look into business and you speak to people that have had any measure of success in business, pretty consistently, excuse the pun, no, don't excuse the pun, it's deliberate, it's pretty consistently, consistency comes up as one of, if not the top things that they contribute to whatever success they've achieved. You can't do big things in one go. It takes deliberate action over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's where the wins are.
I've got a few quotes to share with you. So I was reading something by John Steinbeck over the weekend. I feel like I should read this out in an American accent, but I'm not going to attempt that. But he says, in writing, habit seems to be a much stronger force than either willpower or inspiration. Consequently, there must be some little quality of fierceness until the habit pattern of a certain number of words is established. There is no possibility, in me at least, of saying, I'll do it if I feel like it. One never feels like awakening day after day. In fact, given the smallest excuse, one will not work at all. The rest is nonsense. Perhaps there are people who can work that way, but I cannot. I must get my words down every day, whether they are any good or not. Mm. Steinbeck also talked very eloquently about the internal lack of confidence he had in his work as he was writing. And these were books that went on to be literary greats.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
we studied, of Mice and Men, and things that we studied in in literature, and he writes about them. He says he got most of the way through and almost gave up. Another book that I was thinking about was when I did an A level in literature. That was one of my kind of roots into storytelling as an interest. And at the end of my A level, my teacher, who's a lady called Una Khan, gave me The Warden by Anthony Trollope, which I'm the video version I'm holding up now. Anthony Trollope was a Victorian novelist, but he wrote every day as well. It says in the book introduction, unable to afford a university education, Trollope joined the post office in 1834 as a junior clerk. But it was not until 1841, when he was transferred to Ireland, that he began to make any professional headway. Lots of writing, not much traction, but he had faith that this was going to achieve traction. Trollope travelled widely, undertaking important official duties in Egypt, the West Indies, and the United States. It was during these years that he wrote a lot of his novels, owing in the main to his tremendous self-discipline, writing several hundred words before breakfast. As a hard-working and successful civil servant, Trollope is also remembered as the inventor of the letterbox.
I didn't know that about Trollope.
Yeah. So I think there is an element of showing up, and it's like with these calls. So we have these calls on the calendar every Thursday or Friday, depending on our schedules. And the fact that we have this public schedule every week causes me on weekends to be, I'm going to need a quote to talk about on next week's webinar. So then I end up reading Anthony Trollope, or I end up reading John Steinbeck and all sorts of random things. But it plants the seed, and knowing that you have the public deadline coming up. And okay, so obviously Trollope and Steinbeck were professional novelists, so they wrote every day because that's what they did every day. And it might be that for anyone listening, you're not a professional marketer; it's not your full-time gig. So, I think people overcommit to what they are going to produce. As someone, I spent 3 years writing a weekday email. So I wrote 5 emails a week for 3 years, and it's hard. It's like I would say it's harder. It's more than 5 times as hard as writing 1 email a week.
More than 5 times harder.
It's more than 5. It's about 10 times as hard, I think. It's like there's this, like, if you were to graph it, like the hardness or the difficulty just goes way off the charts. Like all of a sudden, like you set a deadline for yourself at 3 p.m. to have this thing written and drafted, and before you know it, it's 2:30, and you need to get the kids in 20 minutes, and you're there bashing this email out.
And it didn't get any easier over 3 years. That's not a great advertisement for consistency.
In a sense, it gets easier in terms of your skill increases and your writing ability increases. And over time, I think your awareness increases because you know that you've got this public schedule. So you start to build up ideas, and you start to get better at organizing ideas and planning what you're going to write about, talk about, whatever your medium is. You get better at kind of planning those things. So in that respect, it gets easier. But the daily schedule of it never changes. It's like the kids still need to be picked up at 3:00. I still have client work to do during the day. In that sense, it never. I was never like sitting on my porch sipping lemonade, thinking, like, what should I write about today? With this like rolling Greek hills in the background. Like, I never got to that point.
Well, I know where you live. You don't have a porch, and you don't live in Greece, so that's probably why.
Yeah, possibly.
So why did you stop then? Was it because you weren't getting the results, or what?
Yeah, I stopped partly because I took on a full-time employment, and I did carry on writing, but I dropped it down to three days a week for a while. It also became clear to me that, given my audience and my audience size, I have an audience, but I don't have a huge audience. There is a business case to increasing frequency. So the question of how often should you email your list is actually a measurable thing, because it depends how many people you've got in your audience. If you've got 1,000 people on your email list, for instance, the 80-20 principle dictates that 20% of those people will want to hear from you more often. And maybe actually 5% of those people will want to hear from you every day, or multiple times a day, or every time you have a brain fart, they want to receive a new email. But it's only a small proportion of the list. So the bigger the list you have, the more people you have in that hardcore fan group. And the more people you have in that hardcore fan group, the more the business case goes up for producing more frequently.
Right.
The other thing that I learned from doing this was that I was writing for myself as much as anything. And when you look back like over the years, so what I did at the end of each year is I collated all of my daily emails into a book, which I self-published on Amazon. Those books are still on Amazon, actually. They're called Grumpy Marketer 2017, Grumpy Marketer 2018, and Grumpy Marketer 2016 to 2018. And I think it's interesting looking back that there is a clear progression in both the things I was writing about and also my writing style. I look back now and it's like, I kind of want to reuse some of it, but then I've kind of moved on in terms of the things that I'm writing about, and certainly the tone and the writing style. And sometimes it's just easier to rewrite something. But back to the question of why did I stop? It was partly circumstance, and also the sense that at that point in time, my audience wasn't big enough to kind of sustain a daily email. I was doing it for myself first and foremost. The business case wasn't really there. So in every business, for every business owner listening, there will be, depending on your audience, there will be an optimal frequency of the amount of energy you put in to help people to create new content and the payoff. And you have to work out what that is. And I think the problem is that we tend to lead with our own assumptions. We tend to assume that, I wouldn't want to receive a daily email, so nobody wants to receive a daily email. It's like, well, let's just park that assumption. Try writing a daily email for 3 months. See if it kills you, first of all, because it might do, because it's 10 times as hard as writing a weekly email or whatever. But then also measure what the outcome is. Because if you find if you publish a daily email, even if it's 5 days a week, if it's every weekday, if you do that for 3 months, you're going to get quite a good feel for the end of that of who your real fans are, who's really paying attention, who's responding to your emails, who's sending you little messages, who is consequently signed up and become an ideal client who intimately knows, likes, and trusts you as a result of it. Is it worth doing the work for that type of clients?
And it doesn't need to take a lot of time either. I'm in community with a writer called writer business coach. I don't know how she describes herself, called Katie Skelton, and she writes a daily email, has done since April last year. And I found out the other day that she sets a timer for 10 minutes.
Most of mine used to take about 20 minutes, but yeah, it was just bad. I think the reason it was so hard, it was bad planning on my part, bad organization, doing it at the last minute, 20 minutes before the deadline.
Yeah, and I can relate to the consistency aspect with the Not a Straight Line podcast as well, because I started it and I just started having the conversations with people and then just carried on having conversations. And no surprise, not only have I was already pretty good at having the conversations, because the very first episode I recorded is an okay episode. It's not shit. But you can't do something consistently over a period of time and not get better at it. So I've got better at the craft of holding these conversations. And I've also changed myself. You can't show up in the kind of conversations that happen in Not a Straight Line that many times over that period of time and it not to affect you and change you in some way. But that only happens with consistency.
I think to achieve consistency as well, you might need a support team in place.
100%.
So for Not a Straight Line, you've got Matt in the background doing a lot of the work that otherwise would stall consistency. Like, I don't think you would get a weekly episode out.
No.
That's what I was going to chime in and say, because I actually tried a daily video game news podcast a couple of years ago, and I keep floating back to it and going, yes, I'm better. I can do this better. I can organize better. But when I first started, it was every day. And then after a couple of weeks, it was every 3 days. And then it was every 2 days. And then it was the 2 days a week that I felt like I could do it. And then it just stopped, because it is a lot of process. And Rob, when you explained that doing a daily feels exponentially greater in terms of weight in trying to get it done, I resonated with that quite strongly because of that.
It's because the editing just like multiplies by 5,
So,
or the posting of blog posts, or
Well,
the,
there's a lot of rigor in the administrative time that you need for podcasts, particularly. Maybe not so much for email marketing. It's more of the creative and putting together. But for what I found for Dead Drop video game news, it was there was just very little space for you to sit back and go, okay, what do I learn from doing that one? How do I improve for the next one? Like there was very little gap there for like professional, personal development and improvement over time. And I think that's probably where the burden is, because you don't have the time to find the efficiencies.
what bearing does this have on Help Before You Sell? Because for what, as a proxy for the listener, I'm hearing hard and time consuming. It's like it doesn't sound particularly easy. So I'm going to have to be consistent at stuff that is exponentially harder because I'm doing it consistently. Is that what you're saying?
well, understand what you're good at. It's like, are you bearing in mind that there is some editing in production in any format, whether you're making videos, you're creating a podcast, you're writing a blog post. Like, you're still going to have to edit the blog post, set it up on your website, set it up on wherever else you post it to. Could someone else do that? Could you just do the writing? Much easier
or
if you're doing that.
talking.
Or talking.
Yeah, whatever the craft is. But I think, Rob, you said you said the answer like maybe 5 minutes ago, that it's about taking the time to reflect, see what works, and what the optimum balance between frequency, consistency, and audience value. Finding the balance of those things and having the time to reflect, analyze, putting enough time in to be able to have that data, to be able to find that out. I think that's the important thing too. And while that is answering this is too much work and it's heavy with here's a bit of extra work to make sure that you get to the stage that moves you from hat to glove, it's that reflective piece is the most important part for me in any kind of exercise. Like anyone can bury themselves down in a basement without windows and just write an email every day.
That's pretty much what I did.
There you go. That was how the best writers did it, right?
No, I have to have windows. I'm like a plant. I need the light.
Yeah.
For me, the most important aspect of what we've been talking about of consistency is the doing it for yourself, Rob, that you talked about earlier. And going back to my running story, I did that for myself, and I found it immensely meditative. Being out 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, no one else around, and just coming back to one of our foundational principles of podcasting, but whether it's podcasting or journaling or other whatever way you engage with your thoughts, if you're not doing that consistently, then you are not growing. And surely that's the point of life, is to grow. So whatever you're doing consistently, do it for yourself. But it's only going to happen consistently if it's something that is relatively natural to you, whether it be writing for you, Rob, or whether it be talking. But for me, Rob, Matt, I don't know
whatever Matt does. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's spot on too. Because I think what I find I have to do when I talk to people who are doing the podcasting bit or the content creation bit is that people focus very much on what they're delivering, but they have to think internally. That's what I try to tell them. Like, this is about you. What is the journey that's sustainable? The money or the download number going up isn't going to be the thing that keeps you coming back into the basement, writing the emails or recording the episodes.
And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the new podcast we're working on. And this isn't showing whiskers because there's nothing to sell. The hostery. So going into the personal and creative journey stories of hosts of podcasts. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find a theme that the consistent activity of podcasting, them engaging with their thoughts, was a key part of their success and their growth.
You are your own first listener.
Always.
Yeah. And actually, you're listening whether you're writing or whether you're speaking, because you listen in your head through the voice in your head. So it's the same idea.
Do you think there's any tips, takeaways, structures, stuff about consistency, Rob?
Yep. So with my clients, I'm trying to get them to produce something great less often, rather than trying to run off and write five articles a week. Like, don't do that. Don't do that. That's if Help Before You Sell was a computer game, that was playing on extra hard. That's like big boss level type stuff. If you want to play on easy, publish every 2 weeks and then selectively automate your best pieces, which is actually what, if people sign up for our email list, activateyourpodcast.com, that's what we do. So there's various automated emails that go out there, and a lot of those were once live broadcasts that I've gone, maybe I can automate these. So actually, for a period, people might receive 3 emails a week or 4 emails a week until they're caught up, and then they're up to date, and then they receive 1 email every 2 weeks, because they're then receiving the fresh stuff out of the pan. If you think about what you can do writing it, let's say for argument's sake, you're writing, it doesn't matter if you're podcasting or writing, but if you're publishing every 2 weeks, that's 20 to 24 publications over the year. Even if you get to 20 by the end of the year, that's more than enough material for a book, or that's 20 emails that you can queue up when people first enter your world. So when people first enter your world, you probably do want to increase the frequency, because you need to establish that you know what you're talking about, because otherwise people are going to quickly forget. If you really helped someone a lot in the past, I think you get more leeway in terms of lower frequency, because they've already pegged you in their brain as being a valuable resource on a certain topic. So I would argue, for your live ongoing, whether it is contents, podcasts, videos, don't just try to run in a hamster wheel as fast as you can and get to like 2:30 in the afternoon when the deadline's 3:00 and you're banging something else on the keyboard just to hit the deadline. It's like, let's just slow down a bit. Let's publish every 2 weeks. Perhaps every week if you feel comfortable doing that. But I think every mere mortal, whether you're not a writer, not a podcaster, or whatever it is, every 2 weeks is a nice enough schedule. Plus, it allows time to think. It allows time to reflect on what you're going to put into the next one, and you still got the public deadline coming up in a few weeks, so you still got the points on the calendar of like, okay, this is when the next thing needs to be going out. But it also allows some space to say, well, actually, I'm going to, of the 20 that I created this year, perhaps there were 10 that really hit the nail on the head, and we got lots of response rates. And you can go and look at your stats. You can go and compare the email open rates if you're sending out the email. So you can, if you created like a LinkedIn newsletter, go and have a look at the engagement rates. Go and have a look at which of your articles had the highest degree of engagements. Go and automate those ones. Go and add those into your automated sequences. So it looks like you're writing every day, but actually, you're just being consistent on a slower basis.
So many things I love in what you just shared there, Rob. Some takeaways for me. Firstly, I love how what you've articulated there reinforces a relatively consistent theme in our conversations, and that is that this is the slow approach that we're talking about. If you have a desperate need for clients and money, carry on doing whatever you're doing to get that. But what we're describing here is not that. This is work you can be doing alongside that hamster wheel stuff. The other thing that I got from what you said, Rob, is that publishing every 2 weeks, it is a great rhythm, but it doesn't happen by accident. You are going to have to carve that time out in your diary. Carl Newport talks about doing deep work. This is the kind of work we're talking about. You might have 1-2 hour block in a week where all you're doing is thinking about what you could possibly publish, in a couple of weeks' time, and then a couple of days later, you might have another couple-hour block where you're writing the outline for it. And if you have a couple of deep work sessions like that a week over 2 weeks, you can publish something great. Something great doesn't happen overnight. There was one more thing that I got from what you shared, but that is that you're never ever going to get to the great stuff unless you are consistently creating stuff. You don't know it's great until further down the line. So just start where you are.
It's always the ones that you almost didn't publish that get the best response, in my experience.
Yeah.
The stories you almost didn't share, the things that you thought everyone knew, it's rarely the case.
In the YouTuber parlance, it's the video that you put the least effort into that does the best.
Yeah, it's always an afterthought.
Yeah.
The final thought I had on this was that if you want to nurture your audience for years into the future, I think people run short of inspiration when they set too narrow a focus on what they're writing about or talking about. So let's take this podcast as an example. So help before you sell is always like the boundary rope around everything that we're discussing here, but it is quite a generous boundary. There's lots of different rabbit holes that we could fall down here. People assume that their clients are only focused on solving their problems right now, and they're only interested in their problems. So therefore they need to just specifically talk about the problems of podcast editing. So okay, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start a podcast specifically on podcast editing or writing editing. And then 8 episodes in, you've said everything that you wanted to say about writing editing, and you kind of stuck because the topic was actually too focused. So you want to retain relevance. You want to give it a wide enough focus to allow you to stay in contact for years.
And conversely, considering you talked about a podcasting podcast that I started in August, did 11 episodes and never went back to, my poor focus was the breadth of the subject matter and audience being too wide, and the subject matter thus being too not focused enough. Whereas now, funny that you should say, I'm rethinking the podcast to be about intermediate to advanced level podcasting subjects for podcast editors and podcasters looking for the next level. Like, you can narrow or increase the focus as you need to, but whatever it is that paralyzes you is not the good thing.
Can you give us any other examples, Rob, for the listener, just to give them a handle on increasing the scope?
If what you do, it does naturally have a very narrow focus, it's a very specific audience, a very specific problem, you want to talk about that, just do it as a season. Don't plan on doing it forever. Just do it production-wise. Do it as a season, and you can always have multiple podcasts or multiple newsletter threads. What you'll find in creating these things is that as you creating one podcast episode, in my experience, usually spawns off 3 or 4 more. Because as you talk about something, you realize that there's this connection to this other thing. There's like, oh, maybe we could talk about that as well. It's like reading books. My wife's always complaining that I need to read the books that are on the bookshelf before I buy new books. But I'm like, well, reading books causes me to buy more books to the point where they're like piled up next to the bookshelf and in piles on the floor. And she's like, oh, I told you to read. I was like, I am reading them, but reading them. Yeah. So it's the same with producing anything. So get going. And once you're going, you'll find that there's all these opportunities to carry on saying more than you anticipated at the outset.
Any final thoughts to wrap up this episode on consistency?
I think just expect that when you fall off the wagon and you miss the deadline, just get back on the wagon. Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. I think there's what our brains tend to sabotage us from getting back on the wagon. It's like we fall off the wagon and our brain goes, oh, maybe it just wasn't meant to be, or maybe a weekly email, perhaps it's too hard, perhaps I can't do it. And we fall into this kind of fixed mindset type thing. It's like, just get back on the wagon. And if you need support, ask for support. So figure out, why did you fall off the wagon? Had the editing load become too great? Could you ask someone else to create the emails in your email platform, or set up the article on your website, or whatever it is that's taking up? Yeah. So figure out, what is it that's taking up the time?
And in addition to that, be kind to yourself too. Like, practically going through all those aspects is important for the practical component, but just forgive yourself. Like, don't become the flagellant who, goes with his whip and his pen to the desk in the basement. Just forgive yourself and keep going.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.